Welcome to Topical Economics. If you are new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss any of our insightful videos on key economic concepts. In today's video, we're diving into the topic of economic growth. I'll be walking you through some past paper multiple-choice questions, carefully analyzing each one to explain why the correct answer is what it is. Whether you're preparing for exams or just want to strengthen your understanding of economics, this video will help you get to grip with important concepts in a clear and practical way. So, let's get started. Starting with the first question. What may cause a recession? A. An increase in consumer spending. B. An increase in government spending. C. An increase in imports. D. An increase in investment. The correct answer for this question is option C. An increase in imports can contribute to a recession because it represents an outflow of money from the domestic economy to foreign countries. When a nation imports more goods and services, it essentially spends its resources on foreign products rather than on domestically produced goods, which can reduce demand for local industries. This decrease in demand for domestically produced goods can lead to a slowdown in production, layoffs, and lower consumer spending, contributing to an overall economic downturn. In the context of a recession, a significant increase in imports can exacerbate economic struggles by undermining local production and reducing domestic economic activity. Analyzing the other options. Option A. An increase in consumer spending would typically stimulate the economy, not cause a recession. Higher consumer spending boosts demand for goods and services, leading businesses to increase production and hire more workers. This in turn creates a positive economic cycle, increasing growth rather than causing a contraction. In a recession, consumer spending is usually low, so an increase would have the opposite effect of helping the economy recover. Next, option B. An increase in government spending. Similarly to consumer spending, an increase in government spending generally stimulates the economy, particularly during economic downturns. Governments often increase spending during recessions to boost demand, create jobs, and support industries. This can help prevent or alleviate a recession by providing much-needed economic stimulus. Lastly, option D. An increase in investment, in infrastructure, business expansion, or new technologies typically leads to higher productivity, more jobs, and stronger economic growth. Investment is a key driver of economic prosperity, so it would be unusual for increased investment to cause a recession. Instead, higher investment is generally a positive signal for economic health. Moving to the second question. What is identified as economic growth? A. A fall in labor productivity. B. An increase in the productive capacity of the economy. C. An increase in the Consumer Prices Index, CPI. D. The economy enters a period of recession. The correct answer for this question is option B. An increase in the productive capacity of the economy. Economic growth refers to the increase in a country's output of goods and services over time, which is often measured by changes in its gross domestic product, GDP. This increase is typically driven by a rise in the economy's productive capacity, which refers to the ability of an economy to produce more goods and services due to factors like improved technology, more resources, better human capital, and increased investment. When the productive capacity of the economy increases, it means the economy can sustain a higher level of output and economic activity, leading to overall growth. Analyzing the other options. Option A. A fall in labor productivity. Here, labor productivity refers to the output produced per worker or per hour worked. A fall in labor productivity actually signals a reduction in economic efficiency, which is not associated with economic growth. Lower productivity can hinder economic growth because it means the economy is less efficient at utilizing its resources. Therefore, a fall in labor productivity would likely contribute to a slowdown rather than growth. Next, option C. An increase in the Consumer Prices Index, CPI. We know that the Consumer Prices Index, CPI, measures inflation, or the rate at which the prices of goods and services rise. While inflation can occur alongside economic growth, an increase in the CPI itself does not indicate economic growth. High inflation can actually be detrimental to growth by eroding purchasing power and destabilizing the economy. Economic growth focuses on increased output, not rising prices. Lastly, option D. The economy enters a period of recession. A recession is a period of negative economic growth, characterized by a decline in GDP, higher unemployment, and reduced consumer and business activity. It is the opposite of economic growth, as it signals contraction and economic downturn rather than expansion. Moving to the third question. What is a likely cause of economic growth? A. Decreased employment. B. Decreased investment. C. Decreased productivity. D. Decreased taxation. The correct answer for this question is option D. Decreased taxation can stimulate economic growth because it increases the disposable income of individuals and the available capital for businesses. When taxes are reduced, consumers have more money to spend, which boosts demand for goods and services. Additionally, businesses benefit from lower taxes, allowing them to invest more in expansion, innovation, or hiring new employees. This increased spending and investment can lead to higher output, more jobs, and overall economic expansion. Thus, decreased taxation can be a key driver of economic growth. Analyzing the other options. Option A, decreased employment, is a sign of economic decline, not growth. When fewer people are employed, it means there is less income circulating through the economy, leading to reduced consumer spending and lower production. High unemployment typically signals a recession or economic contraction, not growth. Next, option B, decreased investment. Investment is one of the primary drivers of economic growth. When businesses decrease investment, they spend less on expansion, technology, and infrastructure, which can slow down productivity growth and reduce economic output. A decrease in investment typically contributes to economic stagnation rather than growth. Lastly, option C, decreased productivity. Productivity refers to the amount of output produced per unit of input, such as labor or capital. Decreased productivity means that the economy is becoming less efficient in its use of resources. A reduction in productivity leads to slower economic growth because it implies the economy is producing less output for the same amount of input, which hampers growth potential. Moving to the fourth question. Which economic situation exists when there are 2 consecutive quarters, 6 months, of negative economic growth? A. Budget surplus. B. Current account deficit. C. Inflation. D. Recession. The correct answer for this question is option D. Recession. A recession is defined as 2 consecutive quarters, 6 months, of negative economic growth, typically measured by a decline in gross domestic product, GDP. When the economy experiences a recession, it means that economic output is contracting, unemployment tends to rise, business investment and consumer spending decrease, and overall economic activity slows down. The technical definition of a recession is often used by economists to mark a period of economic downturn. Analyzing the other options. Option A, budget surplus, occurs when a government's revenue exceeds its expenditures in a given period. This situation is unrelated to economic growth and typically refers to government fiscal policy rather than overall economic conditions. A budget surplus does not directly correlate with 2 consecutive quarters of negative economic growth. Next, option B, current account deficit, occurs when a country's imports of goods, services, and investments exceed its exports. While a current account deficit can have long-term economic implications, it is not defined by 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth. It relates more to the balance of trade and the financial transactions of a country with the rest of the world, not the broader economic cycle. Lastly, option C, inflation, refers to the general increase in the prices of goods and services over time. While inflation can coexist with periods of economic growth or recession, it is not the situation described by 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth. In fact, recessions are often associated with lower inflation or even deflation, falling prices, as demand in the economy shrinks. Moving to the fifth question. What causes economic growth? A. Availability of more resources. B. Higher imports of consumer goods. C. Higher unemployment. D. Lower investment. The correct answer for this question is option A. Availability of more resources. Economic growth is typically driven by an increase in the availability and efficient use of resources. These resources can include natural resources, human capital, labor, capital goods, machinery, infrastructure, etc., and technological innovations. When more resources become available, or existing resources are used more effectively, the productive capacity of the economy increases, leading to higher output and economic growth. For example, if a country discovers new natural resources or invests in improving education and skills, it can produce more goods and services, contributing to overall economic growth. Analyzing the other options. Option B. Higher imports of consumer goods. Imports themselves do not contribute to domestic economic growth. In fact, an increase in imports means that money is flowing out of the domestic economy to foreign producers, which can reduce demand for locally produced goods and services. While some imports may be necessary for the economy, such as capital goods or raw materials, higher imports of consumer goods generally represent a leakage from the domestic economy, not a driver of growth. Next, option C. Higher unemployment indicates that fewer people are working and contributing to the production of goods and services. Unemployment is typically a sign of economic downturn or inefficiency in resource allocation, and it is associated with lower economic activity and slower growth. In contrast, low unemployment is typically a sign of a healthy economy that is growing and utilizing its labor force efficiently. Lastly, option D. Lower investment. Investment is a key driver of economic growth. When businesses invest in new capital, technologies, or infrastructure, it leads to increased productivity and output. Lower investment would slow down economic growth because it would mean less spending on productive resources, leading to stagnation or contraction in the economy. Therefore, lower investment is not a cause of growth. Moving to the sixth question. Recession is when there are 2 consecutive quarters, 6 months, of A. Deflation. B. Falling GDP. C. Rising prices. D. Rising unemployment. The correct answer for this question is option B. Falling GDP. A recession is officially defined as a period of economic decline where the economy contracts for 2 consecutive quarters, 6 months, as measured by falling GDP, gross domestic product. GDP is the total value of all goods and services produced within a country. During a recession, economic activity slows down, leading to a decrease in GDP. A sustained drop in GDP over 2 quarters is the standard technical definition of a recession. Analyzing the other options. Option A. Deflation refers to a general decrease in the price level of goods and services over time. While deflation can occur during a recession due to reduced demand, it is not the defining characteristic of a recession. Recessions are defined by falling economic output, GDP, not by falling prices. In fact, recessions are often accompanied by low inflation or even mild deflation, but the core feature is the decline in economic activity. Next, option C. Rising prices are characteristic of inflation, not a recession. Inflation occurs when the general price level of goods and services increases over time. During a recession, inflation is often low or negative, deflation, because demand for goods and services typically falls. Therefore, rising prices are generally not associated with recessionary periods. Lastly, option D. Rising unemployment. While rising unemployment is a common consequence of a recession, as businesses reduce their workforce in response to lower demand, it is not the technical definition of a recession. A recession is defined by a decline in GDP, not necessarily by rising unemployment. Unemployment tends to rise because businesses reduce production and cut jobs, but the focus of a recession is on the contraction of economic output. Moving to the seventh question. Economic growth can be defined as A. A reduction in a country's rate of inflation. B. An increase in a country's exports. C. An increase in a country's population. D. An increase in a country's productive capacity. The correct answer for this question is option D. An increase in a country's productive capacity. Economic growth refers to the increase in the production of goods and services in an economy over time, typically measured by the rise in gross domestic product, GDP. This growth occurs when an economy's productive capacity expands, meaning it can produce more goods and services than before. An increase in productive capacity can be driven by factors such as technological advancements, an increase in the labor force, improvements in capital, e.g., machinery, infrastructure, and better utilization of resources. Essentially, economic growth means the economy is becoming more efficient and capable of generating more output. Analyzing the other options. Option A. A reduction in a country's rate of inflation. While reducing inflation is often a sign of economic stability and can support long-term growth, it is not the same as economic growth itself. Economic growth refers to an increase in output, GDP, while inflation refers to the rate at which prices are rising. A decrease in inflation may create a favorable environment for growth, but it is not synonymous with growth. Next, option B, an increase in a country's exports. While an increase in exports can boost economic activity and contribute to economic growth, it is not a direct definition of economic growth. Economic growth occurs when the overall productive capacity of the economy increases, which may involve expanding domestic production, improving productivity, or creating more efficient markets, not just focusing on exports. Lastly, option C, an increase in a country's population. Although a larger population can potentially provide a larger workforce, simply having a bigger population does not automatically translate into economic growth. Economic growth is more about how efficiently an economy can utilize its resources, including labor, capital, and technology. An increase in population might lead to more labor, but does not guarantee that the economy's productive capacity will expand unless there are corresponding improvements in productivity or investment. Moving to the eighth question. Which combination of government policies is most likely to increase the rate of growth of domestic production in an economy? A. An increase in expenditure on infrastructure and an increase in income tax. B. An increase in interest rates and an increase in quotas on imported goods. C. An increase in sales tax and an increase in education expenditure. D. An increase in subsidies to domestic industry and an increase in tariffs. The correct answer for this question is option D, an increase in subsidies to domestic industry and an increase in tariffs. This combination of policies is most likely to boost the rate of growth in domestic production because both measures work to support and protect local industries. By providing subsidies to domestic industries, the government lowers production costs for businesses, making them more competitive both in the domestic market and abroad. This can encourage increased production, investment in new technologies, and the creation of jobs, all of which contribute to higher output and overall economic growth. Additionally, increasing tariffs on imported goods makes foreign products more expensive, which encourages consumers to buy domestic alternatives. This stimulates demand for locally produced goods, thereby boosting the industries that produce them. By protecting domestic industries through tariffs, the government helps foster their growth and expansion. On the other hand, the other policy combinations are less likely to lead to increased domestic production growth. Option A suggests an increase in infrastructure spending, combined with higher income taxes. While increased infrastructure spending can stimulate growth by improving productivity and creating jobs, higher income taxes can dampen economic activity by reducing consumers' disposable income and discouraging investment. This combination is likely to have a mixed or even negative effect on growth in the short term, with higher taxes offsetting the benefits of increased infrastructure spending. Option B, which involves higher interest rates and higher import quotas, is also problematic. Higher interest rates tend to increase borrowing costs, which can reduce investment and consumer spending, slowing economic growth. While import quotas might protect domestic industries from foreign competition, they can also lead to higher prices for consumers and reduced variety in the market, which might hurt overall economic efficiency. Option C, which pairs an increase in sales tax with more spending on education, also presents challenges. While education spending is beneficial for long-term economic growth by improving workforce skills, The increase in sales tax would likely reduce consumer spending in the short term, dampening demand and potentially slowing growth. Moving to the 9th question. In 2016, Romania had an increase in its real gross domestic product of 4.8%. What must this mean about the Romanian economy? A. Living standards increased by 4.8%. B. Total consumer income increased by 4.8%. C. Total output of all goods and services adjusted for inflation increased by 4.8%. D. Total output of manufactured goods adjusted for inflation increased by 4.8%. The correct answer for this question is option C. Total output of all goods and services adjusted for inflation increased by 4.8%. When we say that Romania's real GDP increased by 4.8%, this specifically refers to the total output of all goods and services in the economy, with the adjustment for inflation. Real GDP measures the value of all final goods and services produced within a country in a given period, adjusting for price changes, inflation or deflation, so it reflects the actual growth in the economy rather than just changes in prices. Analyzing the other options. Option A, living standards increased by 4.8%, while economic growth, as measured by GDP, can often lead to an improvement in living standards. Real GDP growth does not directly measure changes in living standards. The increase in real GDP reflects the total output of the economy, but living standards depend on factors such as income distribution, employment, and quality of life, which aren't captured by GDP growth alone. Next, option B, total consumer income increased by 4.8%, is not accurate because real GDP growth refers to the overall output of the economy, not specifically consumer income. While consumer income could rise in an expanding economy, GDP growth does not directly measure income changes for individuals or households. The increase in real GDP reflects the production of goods and services, not just the income distributed to consumers. Lastly, option D, total output of manufactured goods adjusted for inflation increased by 4.8%, is too narrow. Real GDP measures the total output of all goods and services in the economy, not just manufactured goods. It includes agriculture, services, and other sectors, not only manufacturing. Moving to the 10th question. What may directly cause economic growth? A. Higher imports. B. Higher levels of resources. C. Higher taxation. D. Higher unemployment. The correct answer for this question is option B, higher levels of resources. Higher levels of resources directly contribute to economic growth because an increase in available resources, such as labor, capital, and natural resources, allows an economy to produce more goods and services. For example, if a country has more skilled workers, human capital, more capital, machinery, infrastructure, or more natural resources, minerals, energy, it can increase its productive capacity, leading to greater output and overall economic growth. This is one of the fundamental drivers of economic growth, as more resources typically translate into greater productivity and higher GDP. Analyzing the other options. Option A, higher imports, generally represent an outflow of money from the domestic economy to foreign countries. While imports are essential for supplying goods that are not available domestically, they do not directly stimulate domestic economic growth. An increase in imports may reduce demand for domestically produced goods, which could harm local industries and slow growth. Thus, higher imports are typically not a direct cause of economic growth. Next, option C, higher taxation. Higher taxes reduce disposable income for consumers and may discourage investment by businesses, as it increases their costs. While taxes fund public goods and services, higher taxes can stifle economic growth in the short term by reducing the amount of money available for consumption and investment. In general, lower taxes are more likely to stimulate economic activity, whereas higher taxes can slow it down. Lastly, option D, higher unemployment, is a sign of economic distress, not growth. When more people are unemployed, it means that resources, particularly labor, are not being used efficiently, which reduces the economy's overall productive capacity. Unemployment is typically associated with economic downturns or recessions, not growth. Thank you for watching this video. I hope the explanations of past paper questions and the reasoning behind the correct answers helped clarify some key concepts. If you found this video useful, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Topical Economics for more insightful lessons and exam tips. Your support is truly appreciated, and it encourages me to keep creating valuable content to help you succeed. Feel free to leave any questions in the comments, and I'll be happy to assist. Thanks again for being a part of the Topical Economics community.